o'clock.
Thank you, Tara. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to get to know your background today and the different transitions you've been through and your background around divorce. I think all that you'll have to say will be super helpful for our listeners, and we may have some that relate to your story. And so I'm excited for that you're willing to share with us. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. Again, thank you for having me. And yeah, certainly my friends tell me I'm pretty prone to sharing my stories. So this is right in my wheelhouse, I guess. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing it with us. Can you get us started on the story a little bit? Just give us a glimpse at your personal background with divorce and where you're at today.
Sure. So starting with today, I'm a transgender woman who is very, 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 very single. So I use a lot of varies on that because it's been 3 years since my divorce. And over the last few months, I've really opened up to the idea of dating again. I have no clue what I'm doing or how to do it, but like I'm in that process, in that journey, making myself available and open-minded about that. Before that, the Queer Divorce Club is a really neat idea, by the way, Tara. I'm glad that it exists. And you might say that my queerness caused my divorce. So I'm kind of the hyphen between those two words. In my case, gender identity. But my marriage was quite cis and straight, at least to outward appearances. I guess the background of my divorce probably is a story that goes back literally 50 years. And I was married for 21 years. But when I was young, probably in my elementary school ages, I made two big discoveries. One was more towards middle school, but basically one discovery was that I felt like a girl on the inside, but I didn't know what to do with that. And then when I hit puberty, I made another discovery is that I was attracted to men. And I didn't know what to do with that one either. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan. It was very conservative. We didn't have a single queer person out in our high school of a graduating class of about 250 people. So I went about repressing and suppressing all that, and so I tried my best to fit in the man box. And eventually, as I was pushing 30, one of the holy grails of being in the man box was to have a marriage to a cis woman. And so I met a fantastic lady. I still think she's fantastic today. We're still really great friends, my ex-wife and I. And we were married for 21 years, and we had a lot of ups and downs, but more ups than downs. And we have two wonderful children who are 10th graders this year, a boy and a girl, twins. And through the process of our marriage, I guess the girl inside of me kept knocking on the door of consciousness. She just, or me, just kept being insistent that this was an identity that really resonated for me. So for all of my adult life and teenage life, I was a cross-dresser, sort of in secret. And those were moments where I could see myself in sort of a genuine, authentic way, but they were kind of few and far between. And my ex-wife at first was very open to it. She was like, "Oh, I've been bi-curious. I'd like to see you as a woman." But once she saw how into it I was, I think it became a little threatening for her. And so I kind of went like a don't ask, don't tell policy. And I still remember I can envision these blue bins in the basement where all my women's clothes were. And I would like keep them sort of like, and so I kept it very private. And about 6 years ago, I came to a new level of self-acceptance and understanding that I was a transgender female. And at that point, my ex-wife at that point was like, "Oh, great, we can both wear white wedding dresses and renew our vows." And I thought, oh, yes, what girl doesn't want to be in a white wedding dress at some point in their lives? And so I was really into that idea. But over time, we decided that her and I, to be authentic, we couldn't be together.
Yeah.
Basically, we came to the conclusion that we both wanted the same thing. We wanted to be women and love a man, and that just wasn't going to work. And so after about a year of sort of trying to hang in there with things, we began the process of what we call conscious uncoupling, which I know Gwyneth Paltrow got slammed for when she came out with that idea about 10, 20 years ago. I think she was breaking up with Chris Martin from that band Coldplay, but they said, "Oh, we're going to do this with grace, and we're going to just consciously like split up, but like it's not going to be fraught with all these things." Well, I'm here to tell you, it's hard and it hurts like crazy, and it's a lot of work. And so I think that's kind of what she got slammed for, was giving the idea that it wasn't going to be those things. But through it all, I will say that my ex-wife and I really did a good job of doing this with grace, with understanding, with forgiveness, with and openness and vulnerability, and so I think that we uncoupled quite well, but it certainly wasn't easy. So thank you. A very long-winded answer to question one for you.
That was a beautiful answer to question one. I do have a follow-up question about, I'm intrigued by the friendship with your ex. Do you think I think we joke on the podcast a few times about how conscious uncoupling is so difficult, and sometimes you're in the middle of it and you're like, that's ridiculous. Why would I even want to have a good conversation with them? Like, I shouldn't even want this. It's wild. Yeah. How long do you think that it took you from going to knowing you needed to get divorced to like feeling like you were good friends without the contention in the middle of it?
Well, so I guess one of the things I can tell you is I'll take you back to a moment where I'm sitting on a king-size bed with my ex-wife and our two kids, who were, I think, about 12 at the time. And it was our time to announce that we were going to get divorced. And the kids always knew when we were going to have a serious talk, and they were kind of like showing some apprehension about it. And I still remember the squealing sound out of my daughter when we kind of gave that news that we were going to divorce. And it was a really hard moment. But I remember grabbing a napkin, and I was saying, "This is the love between your mom and I right here. And then I'm going to do this with it, and then just kind of show you that." And I'm like, "What do you notice about the napkin?" And they're like, "It's all crumpled and and wrinkled." And I'm like, I said, but I asked, "Is there any less napkin?" And they said, "Well, no, technically it's all the same amount of napkin." And I said, "Well, this is what's happening with your mom and I, that we still very much love each other, and that it's going to change shape. It's going to change form, but it's not going to change amount. We're still going to love each other, and we're going to love you guys, and we're going to love the family as a whole." And so what a great analogy. The problem was it didn't really turn out that way. This is to your question, is that it did change amount. That there's been an inconsistency with our connection. And sometimes that's really hard and hurtful. And we've had a few hard times, but overall we've kept it very, very civil. I'm very thankful for it. I have a new analogy. I'm throwing the napkin away now. It's saying that my love for my ex is kind of like one of those older radios, right? Where you got to adjust the antenna and the dial. And I feel like the metaphor here works because it's when the signal's strong, I can hear it and the connection is there. And that, but sometimes it's kind of in and out. It's kind of fades in and out. And that, like, I'm trying to remember that the signal at the source is probably strong, but there's a disconnect. And that's okay. That sometimes it's just I had one of those times last week, actually. That's a longer story, but basically the idea is that, so I would say that we remained friends throughout, and that there were times when we would hurt each other with our words. There were times when we disagreed on things. But in some ways, we get along better now than we ever did. We don't have to talk about money anymore, for instance.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? I feel like money is always in that top three things that couples struggle with sometimes to talk about or to align themselves together on or have common ground on. But so we went to like 2 or 3 concerts at Meyer Gardens together this summer. I've been camping with my ex. We share a group of friends, and we can all be together and not have it be awkward. So I think our kids were a big factor in this. That one of the things they'll see is they'll see your disconnect, they'll see your pain, your hurt, they'll see your imperfections and brokenness, but they also see your recovery, your resiliency, your ability to forgive and to move forward together. And so that's the kind of, vibe that we wanted to have come through to our kids.
It takes a lot of work, and it's awesome that you're able to get there and to able to continue to do it. I love that radio analogy.
Oh, yeah. Another one I've shared with a couple of clients of mine is that it's kind of like reconstructing an airplane while it's flying, So everything's always in motion. We're always in transition and change, and we're trying to do this really fundamental foundational work while it's in the air. And so that is the work part for sure. Yeah.
It is so hard to build a plane while you're flying it. I use that analogy a lot. I feel like that's my go-to mode. Live in the stress. Okay, I got to be content. Got to let the plane land every once in a while.
I love the content part, Tara. Yeah, it's like, well, at least it's breezy up here or something.
Yeah. Keeping
trying
me going.
to look on the bright side. Yeah. I think I had some hurt feelings over a lot of different things. I think she really wanted to explore. She's one who always had a boyfriend and had maybe 6 months where she was single in her entire life. And of course, now we both crushed that record. But like she, unlike me, who was single throughout most of my 20s, she always had somebody. So she really wanted to define who she was independent of me. And I was still looking for the napkin thing. Like, where's the love? I thought we were supposed to like still hang. And so we had a little bit of disconnect on that. But, it's like you say, it's a reinvention. It's a construction. And today I'm happy to call her, one of my best friends. And in fact, she owns a resort on a lake up north, and I stayed there last weekend with them as a family, and had the Sunrise Suite, it's called, and we went and we hot tubbed together, and we just went out kayaking on a Sunday morning, and so I think it is possible. I think that the hurt and the pain kind of gets away of a friendship forming after a divorce, but that's really challenging. One of the things I had to remind myself is that, hurtful remarks might be what her step one looks like. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that that's where she's going to remain.
Yeah. I think we're all in that moment too. We don't know what the grief is going to make us feel like, or what changes we're going to want after we make the decisions. It takes time, patience.
Absolutely. It certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah. So, besides the divorce, you've gone through quite a few changes, as you were just mentioning, over the last few years. So you made a transition. Are you living fully out now as a woman?
Oh, yes. I've been living full time as a woman for about 3 years. I would consider my gender transition to have started probably a few years prior to that. But when it comes to the subject of changes, I think of that David Bowie song, changes, time to face the strange. And I faced a lot of strange. And just in 2 years, I changed my gender, including hormone therapy and gender affirming surgery, been living full time as a woman. I got divorced. I retired from a career in high school of 23 years. I sold my house of 20 years. I moved like 5 times. And there was a little global pandemic going on at the same time.
Right.
So those were all things that have happened over the last few years. And, I have some clients who really feel such a big gap between where they are now with their gender transition and where they want to be. And sometimes I'll whip out my old driver's license from just 5 years ago. But what you see in that picture is nothing like me outside, and I think inside too. I've changed pretty dramatically. So yeah, it's been a time of change for me in the last 5 years, like tremendous life altering stuff.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the catalyst for you being able to say, like, I know you talked about this a little bit, but I need it to live my full authentic self now. Like now is the time. Like, it
Oh
sounds like
my
you worked
gosh.
through it with your wife and stuff, but what was that change in you? What did that feel like?
It felt like I was sleepwalking, like a zombie for most of my adult life. And that the process of becoming a woman has been like I've been awake and alive in a way I never was before, and present for the world, for others, for myself, in my body in ways that I never have been before. You mentioned catalysts, so I kind of go with a collection of catalysts, if you will. One definitely was sobriety. So as a lot of people with depression and anxiety can tell you, one thing we tend to do sometimes is overuse substances. Mine was alcohol. And around 2016, I just decided to give it a break. And I just quit drinking altogether, cold turkey, just one day, I decided. And I went close to a year without a drop of alcohol. And what happened was this sort of gauze lifted, and I could see myself more clearly. And I finally, sort of got the courage to like really lean into transgender research and sources of help. And I remember having a book in Barnes and Noble's parking lot written by a transgender woman about her experience. And I took a highlighter and I said, okay, I'm going to highlight everything that reminds me of my life or my experience or something I've thought or done before. And I sat there for 2 hours, read the entire book, and my fingers were sticky yellow with highlighter at the end of this experience because I had highlighted about half of the book. Mm-hmm. And I closed that book that day and said, holy moly. I actually didn't say that, but I don't want to swear on this podcast. And I said, I am a transgender woman. Mm-hmm. And what next was really the thing. And so the next catalyst for me was in this is just being out as a woman. I went to the Electric Forest Festival. It was the first time I was ever in public as a woman with any other human being other than my ex-wife. And that was quite an accepting crowd. I guess you could say I was cherry picking a bit because it was like everybody was all glittered up and they were probably on some unknown substances and they were a very accepting group, right? So like,
yep.
But it was really filled my bucket in a way that I had never experienced before. And I think that was a moment in my marriage where my wife realized that this was more than just, maybe some gender fluidity or cross-dressing. I remember the look on her face seeing me sort of like at a concert and just, dancing and those things. And I think that's the thing. A catalyst also was therapy, both group therapy and individual therapy. Group therapy was great because I could hear from other transgender and non-binary, genderqueer people to talk about their experiences, and I didn't feel alone. And individual therapy as well was really irreplaceable. I've developed a phrase at that time, which was like, sometimes the fear won't go away, so you'll just have to do it scared. I think for many decades, I was waiting to like build up motivation or the fear or some kind to conquer fear. And then I realized, no, maybe the fear is just going to be around here. And so maybe what can I accomplish while I'm scared? And so I just did a lot of the scared. And the final catalyst, Tara, I would have to say, and is unfortunate, and I would wish away the pandemic in a second if I could. But the pandemic, as a lot of LGBTQ people would tell you, was a catalyst. And for me, it was, if the world might end, I'm going to be a woman as it happens.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of hustled me up and gave me sort of a last little bit of push. And 3 years later, here I am with a, a wonderful new career and a reformed relationship with my ex. And so I'm just really thankful and have a lot of gratitude for the people around me and the whatever internal capacity I had to be able to do things scared. I guess I'm thankful for that too.
Yeah, I can relate so much to a lot of those catalysts and the idea that, I mean, the pandemic for me too was like, I think I heard a research study about the pandemic afterwards and like how many people got divorced, how many people made big life changes. And they're like, again, if the world's going to end, I got to be who I am going to be, like that's what it felt. It like kick-started that in me. For me, it was like, I have to be a lesbian if I'm going to make it. If I'm going to make it anymore in this world, I can't
Oh my
die.
gosh,
Can't
that's
die
really
straight.
inspiring.
I
Yeah,
know.
that's really inspiring. And I think that it's interesting that it takes something like that. And I noticed really your language there was interesting because I have to be a lesbian. I love that line because really a lot of psychological distress, I think, is when we don't align ourselves with who we are internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that like there's a disconnect that we're trying to live, and that it's not something we choose. It's something we discover about ourselves, and then our choices about how are we going to honor this discovery about my gender or sexuality or anything else that I've discovered? Am I going to repress it and suppress it? Am I going to interact with it a bit? Am I going to display it in the world? And so, like, I appreciate your sentiment there.
I appreciate also how you were talking about like doing things scared. But then my first thought was like, how do you do things scared? How do you
Yes.
do things
Oh my
scared?
gosh.
You got to be
Totally.
brave. How'd you build up your bravery? Like what things around you helped you keep moving forward?
Oh, that's a really good question. When I think about that, I think about friends and family. I think one of the things I had going for me that a lot of my clients don't necessarily haven't had the time, the life experience to build up this network. I have a pretty big social network of friends and family. And after 40 years of having that, when I decided to come out, I think people were more willing to just say, "Oh, a girl, huh? Okay, I guess we'll go along with you," And I think when you're in your teens or 20s, you just don't necessarily have your full tribe built up yet like that.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, my friends and family, I would say 99% of them were accepting and supportive. And then, in addition to that, I think, how do you do it scared? That's a really good question because I thought it was such a neat, like, little way to put it. And then in my experience, my clients are asking me the very same thing. Like, that's really cool, Jonelle, but how did you do it? And how is a word I like a lot, Tara. And one of my discoveries is that for many years, I was asking why, the old why me, why to God or why or why, there's a big why and a little why in life that we all confront. And the little why is why me? Like, why do I have this thing or that thing or this family or that family or this situation, feeling like somehow the universe has treated us personally unjust. But then there's the big why question, which is, why do we exist? Why are we here? And I realized that I had been struggling with that for a long time with my gender. And then I realized I was asking the wrong damn question. A better question is how. And so at that time of my life, I just transitioned to how. Okay. So, like, I don't know why I'm a transgender woman, Tara. I couldn't tell you. Is it hormones? Is it like parental experiences? Is it, which I think is bullcrap, but it's probably a perfect storm of factors. But I do know this, and anybody LGBTQ can tell you, it feels a lot less like a choice and a lot more about like this discovery. I compare it to an archaeologist sifting through the sand and then they uncover this thing.
Yeah.
And if any choice comes into it, it's what we do about it. And so basically what I discovered though, much, is that, oh, I'm going to be so nervous to put on a sundress and go into Target. But wearing the sundress and feeling beautiful and feminine actually reduced my fear. And I would sit there in the parking lot like, am I going to be nervous to walk in here? And I'm like, I don't really feel that nervous. So I just got to walk in, I guess.
You just got to walk in. I like that. And I think as you were thinking about that, the idea of it being a discovery inside yourself, I think there's a lot of people who, I know a lot of people I've talked to too in LGBTQ community, and even beyond that, like even women as they're growing up, they're like realizing that their authentic self is a discovery of something inside of them, not like this outwardly, you're right, like who I need to be in society and where I need to be. And, it's kind of painful though, that discovery. Like I was just thinking about that, the pain between discovering and being able to live that space. I think that Brene Brown talks about that as like a midlife crisis. A lot of us go through that time where we just realize at some point that we can't live with the training that we've had in the past or who we've been in the past. And then we have this huge unraveling of who we actually are. I think that.
Yeah, I think
wild.
That is wild. I love Brene Brown. I've got Atlas of the Heart right behind me over here. And I listen to some of her stuff on podcasts and tapes and stuff too. And that I think if we can look at that unraveling as a necessary part of our evolution and growth, that helps. It's the idea that through crisis comes growth, and that if we can get just that one step of safe distance and removal from the intensity of it, and see it that way. I love the quote that we what we see in life is a result of what we're looking for. And I can tell you, I'm coming across as like, oh, I found my authenticity, but it's not easy. I'm not perfect. Last night, I was really, really agonizing over what to wear to a YouTube podcast, and this dress was the winner. But like, this is like, I know that my authenticity doesn't depend on a fabric hanging on my shoulders, but like, I still have my moments, probably like we all do on a daily basis, about asking what is authentic for me. Not maybe that's with appearance, but it's also with our relationships and our careers and our families and everything else.
Yeah, I think the part I've been stressing about for myself is like I'm always going to grow and always going to be changing, and my new partner and I will always be changing, and the kids will always be changing, and we have all of these things ahead of us. At the same time, I want to find who I am authentically within that, and I'm like, what is that? This dynamic does not always make sense. Like we're changing and moving and whatever, and then all of a sudden we're like, shoot, who am I in the inside? But I feel like there has to be this feeling, there has to be this, I don't know, it's contentment maybe. It's like that finding of contentment in each of the spaces of growth, but having to find that contentment never ends. I feel like, at least that's the experience I'm having right now. Maybe.
That's a good way to finish that off, Tara. I'm the same way. I think that I have this phrase, living the question. This is what we do. And every day when we open up our eyes in the morning, this thing happens where our reality collapses into our own lives and our own little stories. And then we go about like being the author of those stories and asking that question every day. I'm with you on the contentment piece. I think maybe I'm most authentic when I go past the notion of self in the first place, right? And it's like this almost a spiritual orientation to just be here now. I really like this Leonardo da Vinci quote that I've run across, which is something like this. He says, when I place my hand in the river, I simultaneously say goodbye to what has come before and hello to what comes next. And I feel like our human existence is like that hand in the river, where we live sort of in an endless now. And anxiety is a lot about upriver or downriver, the past or the future. But right now, unless a semi is veering over into my lane, I don't necessarily need anxiety in the now a whole lot. It's there for those emergency situations. So to be authentic for me is to be present, in your body. I think one of the most funny ways that I do that now is I dance a lot. And as a man, I was always so self-conscious about dancing, but it's like my hips have been set free here, you know? And so now I just
Hmm.
love to move my body, and I
Hmm.
do yoga, and I really like to be present in my body and present with others. The counterintuitive thing, I thought I was going to lose all my friends and family. And basically, every relationship in my life, with a couple exceptions, is better, is richer, is fuller,
Mm.
deeper now. So, yeah, like I said, awake and alive is what's my transition. I'm trying to embrace that part of it. I remember being on hormones for just like a couple of months and then grabbing fistfuls of grass and going, was it always this green? Like everything just, it was like the world opened up. And so
Hmm.
I think authenticity is a daily adventure for us to like tap into, and it's always an open question. I think as we move through time, I think you did a real good job of describing that.
And I love that river idea. I was thinking about my anxiety too. Like, what's down the river? What did I leave down the river? What is ahead of me? What is it? Yeah. Thinking
Yes.
of that moment is, whew, that's mind boggling. I need to work on that.
Hey, yeah. My mom is this
Hmm.
old, like wise soul. She was a social worker, PhD, taught college for years, and but she has this phrase like, "It's not happening today." And this is her way because she would see me stew and get anxious
Hmm.
about things that were future oriented or that happened in the past. But she had to remind me, just, I'll say to clients sometimes, let's just do Tuesday. Right? Like today is Tuesday, and
Hmm.
you and I will part here in a bit, and then we'll go about just doing Tuesday. Stay here.
I like that. I love that. Also, you must have got the quotes from your mom. She was in.
Pretty
She passed
quotable.
those down. I like it.
Oh
I
yeah,
like
she's
it.
definitely a word nerd for sure.
Hmm. You've talked a little bit about the supports that you had through your transition. So you had therapy, group therapy, individual therapy,
Mm-hmm.
going to, I like the idea that you went to Electric Forest. And I understand I haven't been to Electric Forest, but I've been to other places where I can feel that intense belonging and how healing intense belonging like that can feel. It's kind of amazing. We need to have both. I wish that could happen every day, right? I kind of get a high of going to a festival and being like, I'm in this really space of belonging and I love it. And then next week I'm like, oh, why can't the world be like this all the time?
Oh my gosh, Tara,
It's
you are
so
speaking
hard.
my language. I would live at music festivals if I could. Even before I transitioned, I was a big enthusiast of live music, and I followed the Grateful Dead around when they had Jerry Garcia, and I saw them like 30 some times or something, and I was always into that sense of community and like love and belonging that you would get
Mm-hmm.
in those settings. And so the forest was, I never really imagined that I could live as a woman. I never really started to believe it until right before the pandemic. It really was. And remember walking into the forest, and this really busy bartender we ordered a drink, and she stopped what she was doing and looked at me in my purple sparkly prom dress I
Mm-hmm.
was wearing, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, you look fantastic." And those three words, "you look fantastic," just like exploded in my heart like a diamond. Like I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't believe that I could be accepted out there in public, and that I actually looked okay, and that I could do this. It was a moment where I realized I could do this. I really do wish it didn't. I know this is the Queer Divorce Club podcast, so to get marriage back into it, I think I would have hung in there a bit, but I wanted to honor um, my wife's own authenticity because she had helped me so much in my gender transition.
Mm-hmm.
And she just came to me the Christmas before the pandemic. It was like 2 months before, and said that she wasn't sure that this was going to be authentic to be married to a transgender woman. And I said, okay, I understand that. So it's one of those love each other enough to let each other go kind of
Yeah.
things.
Mm-hmm. Oof, it's so difficult to do that. It's kind of, yeah, get so much of that when you're raising kids, but you don't think about that in your adult relationships and the connection you can make, and how really living in our truth sets us all free. It's amazing to be in that space.
Yeah.
On the other end of it.
Yeah. And my kids have been tremendous throughout this process too. I think that they miss the foursome that we were once,
Yeah.
and I think the moments that we get that, which are about at least once a month, we'll have a meal or something, or we'll do a pontoon ride or something, and you can see it on their faces that they sort of value that experience. But with my gender transition, they were wonderful too. I think almost anybody under the age of 20 kind of looks at gender a whole different way now.
Yeah.
That there's a lot more open-mindedness and acceptance there.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome to have your kids alongside you. They go through divorce too, and there's a lot of grief there, but it doesn't have to mean that their life is ending. There's this other space of being able to rebuild in a positive way for them, expand their experience, even though it's hard to lose. Like you said, the foursome used to be, or the family used to be. Of course, it's difficult.
I grew up witnessing a failing marriage, and both my parents are good, big-hearted people. But together, they would, if you met them within 5 minutes, you'd be like, those two, really? Like what happened? And but I came along in 1968, and that was an era that if a woman got pregnant, you got married and you stuck it out. And not a lot of people got divorced back in those days. Mm-hmm. They did, but not at the rate they do today. There's more of autonomy attached to it. And so I say this to some of my clients too, is that when they are thinking of splitting up, the kids are one of the primary concerns, of course. It's like, how's this going to impact them? Like divorce is really going to negatively impact them. And of course, it is a hard, hurtful time for them. But it's also hard and hurtful to watch a non-functional marriage for years. And so like I graduated 3 years before my sister. And then she graduated, and my parents had divorced within 3 weeks of my sister graduating high school. It was like once we turned 18 and got that diploma, like then they could finally be free to live their own individual lives. And I was like, maybe that should have happened in like 1975 when we were like in grade school, and just like. And so I think that there isn't an easy answer. I think that, you go through a lot of things to try to make a marriage work. And when that doesn't work, I think loving each other enough to let each other go becomes a viable thing. And again, the kids see the hurt and experience it, but they also see the resiliency, and they are seeing your intentional efforts at trying to make it work with this person as you untangle and build a new normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's for a lot of people, right, it's wrapped up in the guilt of the fact that you're choosing this for them. I mean, you're making the choice that to stay in the marriage, but there's a lot of other things that could happen to kiddos that they don't have a choice, right? Somebody gets sick, somebody dies, like all of these things that can happen in kids' life. And we know that there's these supports for them, that we're going to help them through it. Divorce is, just because you chose to do it doesn't mean that it's not something you can help them through in the same way. The grief, kids can still get through their grief and, build off of that and grow.
Yeah, I really like you've mentioned grief a couple times, and I think that's a really wise way to view it too, that there is grief here, and that there's no right or wrong way to grieve other than to grieve, to find ways of expressing. I talk a lot about putting the motion in emotion, right? Because if you drop the E, what the root of emotion is movement, right? It's motion, it's being able. In this way, I think like a 3-year-old toddler might be the most emotionally brilliant person we meet, because when they're bad, you don't know it. When they're sad, they're crying, and when they're happy, they're rolling on the floor, belly laughing. They feel an emotion and express it almost immediately, and then move on to something else. And that we adults, we get stuck in these things. Stuck in sad is called depression. Stuck in worry is called anxiety. And so I think it's really important that I think that if kids are involved in a divorce, that they see these intentional movements and efforts to make things work, to move through and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say that you're most proud of during this last 5 years of 6 years of transition and getting to where you're at today?
Wow. What am I proud of? I think I'm proud of just how we did it. That we tried the napkin thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we tried to keep a very palpable, very observable. I think probably another way to answer this, Tara, would be that you know, a marriage, I think, is a closeness and a vulnerability that is quite uncommon. I think it's closer and more vulnerable and more intimate than what we have with our parents, with the exception of maybe when we were babies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's closer and more intimate and more vulnerable than we are with our best friends. It's a relationship like no other. And because of that, I think is that we let this other person in. We let them all the way in.
Mm-hmm.
Our doors and windows open for them. And this is how they can hurt us so much. This is
Right.
how the damage is done, is that I've let you in so closely that you know all of my weaknesses. You know my flaws. You know my beauty and my brokenness. And so you can hurt me like no other.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that, I think my ex-wife and I did this thing we called freedom and forgiveness, which is things that we would grant each other. And we grouped them into those two categories, freedom and forgiveness. And freedom was for both ourselves and the other person, freedom to explore what feels genuine, authentic, to be who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And freedom for the other person to exhibit vulnerability, to be hurt, to give us pain, to dish it out a little bit, to show some anger. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was freedom to be here wherever you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then following that was forgiveness. Forgiveness for yourself, for being imperfect, but growing and becoming who you are, and forgiveness for the other person for saying something hurtful to me, to being angry with me, to really like saying things that we want to say aren't true,
Mm-hmm.
but like maybe have a seed in truth because we let them in. They know what our vulnerabilities are. They know what our weaknesses are. And having that. So we went back to that a lot, that freedom and forgiveness thing, because one of us would react negatively to something that somebody was saying that was challenging. And then we went back and said, yes, but I felt free to say that to you. And then the other person hopefully would say, I forgive you. But sometimes that would take a few days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take a few days. My last one took 3 days. And the radio analogy really helps me because I realized, oh, this is one of those times where it's staticky and not coming in clear.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And so I just chose to love her anyways. She had asked me to go to Florida. And I was like, well, no, I can't even use a bathroom down there right now, legally. And then following that, she was like, oh, do you want to watch our pets? So, no, I live an hour away, and
Yeah.
I had to work through some funky feelings because I felt like, oh, she's not considering me or whatever. But I probably follow anti-trans legislation more than the average bear. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's,
Mm-hmm.
and I just forgave her for that. And and then we had a wonderful weekend just a few days later. So yeah, I guess, my pride would be that invention of the freedom and forgiveness thing, and
Mm-hmm.
having it be a system that we could kind of return to, like a home base, that got us through. And now I think we're out the other side, and that we're going to be good friends, but sometimes we might see and talk a lot, and sometimes it's going to kind of fade out. But
yeah, I think that's really profound to be able to say to the space, like, you're free to feel whatever you need to feel in this moment, be who you need to be. And I forgive you because I understand it's hard. I understand it's hard for you and it's hard for me. And we're both going through lots of big changes. That is really profound. I love that.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it might be profound. It's also quite tricky.
Yeah.
It's,
Yes.
but I think if you could agree to keep returning to that,
Hmm.
such a really magical thing that happens is that when you're through the pain of divorce and the splitting up and the money and the kids and the custody and all that stuff, you can still have a wonderful, wonderful friend out of this thing.
Yeah.
And I really want that for people. My mom and dad, like I said, they got divorced in '89, and but they're still able to inhabit a space with grace and humor and things. And I want this for people because it seems. I'll tell you, you said grief. Here's one. Grieving is a lot harder when the person's still here.
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
it's super hard for, I went to 3 funerals 6 months shy of high school graduation because of things. So it's really hard when young people die and things, and I get it. But like, there's a finality to that. But like, it's hard to close a wound that is constantly open,
Mm-hmm.
opened by the presence of this other person. And so I think that that's when forgiveness really comes to play a key role.
Hmm. I was just thinking about that um, how sometimes it just takes a moment to try and then try again and repair if it didn't work and then try again. And then eventually over time, if, you can work yourself into being friends, if only
Oh,
one person's
yes.
working on it or the other, there's some cases where the other person is not going to work on it. And that's unfortunate. And you have to find acceptance in that as the person who may be willing to forgive or want to have a better relationship. If the other side does not want to, you have no
Yeah.
choice in that. But there's this other space of like, we have no idea how to do this. And we think we want
Yes.
to be kind to one another eventually. So let's like
Yes.
try to
Yes.
one step at a time.
Yeah, I think if you could find that essential kindness there, I think that's good. And yeah, I always say too that we want growth to be such a linear process, but it's
Mm-hmm.
anything but. And so it's going to be it's going to be like a roller coaster, but I try to make it more like a roller coaster for age 8 and under, where the highs aren't too high and the lows aren't too low. It's
Yeah.
kind of one of those. It's not like the demon drop where you're like just like going
Yeah.
off the deep end there, both literally and metaphorically, I suppose. But yeah, I think that's the thing. I think that we got married in the first place because we sensed that there was some core common values and
Mm-hmm.
common worldviews, and hopefully kindness and the desire to connect and to have compassion for one another is one of those values, and you
Mm-hmm.
can get back there, but like it takes a lot of this hurt and pain to have it be vulnerable. That's one of Brené's big things, right? Brené Brown
Mm-hmm.
is just that we've been sold such a false bill of goods with the idea that vulnerability is a weakness or something to hide and
Yeah.
keep private, and so I think that that's probably something that we did and continue to do, my ex-wife and I, decently.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds wonderful. I'm just thinking we've come down to the last question here, and you've already given so much with your story and so many great quotes and advice, and I love it. I'm wondering though, do you think you could leave the listeners with something that you feel like is the most important to think about as they're going through divorce or if they're in the rebuilding stage?
Well, a lot of it is in that freedom and forgiveness thing I mentioned, and I think also just saying that transition. And so obviously in my life that's played out in a gender way, but I think all humans are eternally in a state of transition,
Mm-hmm.
and that what it looks like today is not what it maybe will look like tomorrow, and to keep that in mind, that it's an unfolding process. It's like this journey in what looks like maybe hate or anger, disgust, those really powerful things. That this is what step one looks like,
Mm-hmm.
for your partner, for maybe yourself, right? And to have that just be okay in the moment, but then know that it's going somewhere else. That ultimately the intensity of that pain will decrease, right? And the duration of it, and that nobody wants to be in a state of resentment, right? But the other person can't really release you from that. Only you can, you know. And once you do, then you look at it a whole different way, you know. And so I think that we are worthy of the greatest love, and love is always a risk, but it's always worth it. And in the end, love wins. And so whether it's breadcrumbs or a clear blazing path, find your way back to love. Find your way back to, because it's not all is lost. Whatever you fell in love and had back 10, 20 years ago, there's seeds of that there. It's just, it's changed form, it changed amount, but it doesn't need to be lost forever. I don't think. Even if love is a Christmas card in the mail once a year and not disparaging you in front of my kids, okay.
Check.
And that's generous love. That's what you have to give at that point, and that's okay. But I think the toxicity and what you want to get is out of the loop of toxicity and like attacking and things like that. You're already vulnerable. You've already let them in. Yes, they can say and do hurtful things, and you probably can too. But I'm really stubborn, Tara, and my worst fear is probably being stuck, right? Like, so like find ways to become unstuck would be the best thing I could say in that situation.
Find ways to become unstuck. I love it. You've given us so many gems. So good. I'm looking at all my notes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad we got to talk.
Well, you gave me a couple days to think about it, so I jotted a few things down. But like, probably if my clients listen to this, they'll be like, "Oh, I've heard that one before."
We know that one,
right? But and a lot of this, to be honest with you, is me telling myself this stuff. Really, so, you know, I think one of the Greek philosophers said, "Physician, heal thyself," and so that's kind of a constant process for Jonelle here too. So
yeah. Do you have lots of stickies on your mirror? That's my go-to.
Yes. I love sticky notes. I love sticky notes. I have them all over, all sticky colors.
Notes. Yeah, bright as can be. Okay. Sticky notes are important.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity. And you're doing really good work here, Tara. So keep it going. And I'm going to start to tune in as a listener as well. So
thank you so much. And thank you for giving us your time and for sharing your story. And listeners, if you're looking for Jonelle, you can find her at rivercitypsychological.com. I'll put that in the show notes. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Tara, and have a great rest of your week.